Hello, hello, hello. Happy Thursday. Welcome to Cram Session 2. The week is almost over. The work week, the school week. Looks like we might have a little crowd this stream. That's okay. I'm wearing my Fiveable shirt, but I'm not showing enough to see. So just in case you were wondering, if I wear the same shirt every Cram session, yes, I probably will, but it is the Fiveable shirt. And I have my Fiveable blue earring also. Yes, so I'll say that again later on. But yes, so we're going to change times to 6 o'clock because there was too much conflict. The greatest conflict, it seems, was AP Psych. So I want everybody to be able to get everything. I know that depending on where you are, 6 o'clock might be early. But hopefully we can do that. So we're going to start next week at 6 o'clock, taking Psych. Okay. I like Psych. It's really interesting. I didn't take it until college, but I really enjoyed it. I should have taken more. Yeah, it is. It is a lot of terms, but I like it because it's like it makes sense. You know, it's like things that actually happen in your brain and your body and your life. So I feel like it's easier to remember than like biology. Biology also a lot of terms and way more than I can keep up with. I guess I'm losing my voice a little bit, but I didn't know because I'm isolating alone. So I don't actually talk very much. So this is my first conversation today. All right. So I'm going to get going. I don't think I'm getting sick. I do have some allergies. And I've been going outside every day. Pollen is ridiculous in Atlanta right now. So everything is just covered in pollen. So it gives me a little tickle in the back of my throat. And headaches. But other than that, I don't think, fortunately the symptoms don't cross over between my allergies and COVID-19. So I'm breathing just fine. Nothing is stopped or tight. It's just a little bit in my voice. So the Cram session schedule has obviously changed. So it's just different ways to look at prose analysis. Every week I'm going to try to look at a prose analysis prompt, either from College Board or of my own making. We'll see that there are, patterns that we can expect for the prose analysis. And so we'll just dive into the different things that you might analyze in getting to analyze a prose passage. So this week we are going to spend some time with terms, not too much time because they're not, they're probably not unfamiliar terms. And so I am going to give you a list, but I don't want you to get too caught up in the terms because I think if there are any terms that you don't know right now, you don't want to try to memorize them before the test. I also think that knowing that the exam will be all prose helps us kind of actually not need as many terms because there are certain terms that we memorize that are really more poetry related, more often to be found in poetry. And so we're going to leave those to the side and we're just going to look at the types of terms, the types of things that you will find in prose analysis. As always, follow Think Fiveable. Also go in the community if you haven't been there. Also, whatever email address you use to get this Cram Pass, I sent an email to that address. So I'm not going to email you often, probably once a week, even after we go to twice a week with the Cram sessions, which will be the week after next. So the week of the 20th is the week that we will go to 2 Cram sessions a week. That'll be Monday and Thursday at 6 p.m. So you will definitely get your fill of me. I will also still be doing some of the free. Laura and I will be alternating on the free streams Mondays at 8. So it's very possible that you could see me 3 times a week if that's what you want, and they will all be different. So there won't be repeated content, so that we can really cram in a lot of prose analysis before the exam. So the next 3 crams that will be next Thursday, who plus what plus where equals why. And we'll be looking again at structure, but more at setting and how that plays into structure and how that equals, how that goes with characterization to make meaning. Because it's very likely that you will be asked to characterize something on the prose analysis essay. Then the session after that, the session after that, where I'm calling Who Is He and What Is He to You, which is a Bill Withers song. Bill Withers recently passed away. But it's about relationships. So we'll be talking about relationships and characterizing relationships, complex relationships. And then the next one, It's Not What You Say, it's how you say it. And that will be on diction and syntax and analyzing those. And we're going to talk just about how to talk about diction. I remember last week I talked a little bit about diction is always used, so we don't ever want to say he used diction, but there are ways that an author can use diction to create meaning. So we're going to talk for figurative language, like I said, some terms for prose analysis. Then we're going to look at some examples, and I'm going to go through how I would analyze them and how I would explain. So this session is just about being able to explain what the language is doing, pushing toward how that language creates whatever element you've been asked to analyze. So I'm going to just read some examples. So a few of you who filled out the Google form that I sent in the email, if you haven't done that, feel free to do it still. I still want your input. I asked what books you were reading or just had read, and so I'm going to use some of those because some of them are my favorites. And I will continue to use those just so we can make connections between what you're doing in your regular classes, if you are still having regular classes online, between your regular classes and what we're doing here. So, and then we're going to do a practice prompt, and you're going to actually read the prompt. We'll read the beginning together, and then I'm going to kind of set you free and pull you in just for some checks, and then kind of figure out how to talk about language, how to explain the language. So here I have some basic terms. There are 2 slides of terms. I didn't give the definition to all of them because I think that some of them you're really familiar with. Some of them I just wanted to stamp into your brains. If you see one on the slide that you don't know the definition of, or you would like an example of, just put that in the chat. That's fine. Because we can never have too much knowledge, right? So we know, though, that the point of the prose analysis essay on the AP exam, or the AP exam for 2020, the point is not to identify figurative language. The point is not to show, oh, I know this term and I see it here. The point is to be able to explain it. And so it helps to have examples in your head that you can say, oh, well, if it falls into that, then it's this kind of figurative language. But I cannot say enough, and I'll probably say every week, every time we get together, it doesn't matter if you know what it's called. It just matters that you know what's being done. So again, figurative language is most often going to be repetitions, references, or comparisons. And so it's definitely always enough to be able to say that the author compared these 2 concepts, compared these 2 items, compared these 2 people, compared a person to this concept, whatever it is that's being compared. It's always appropriate to say that the author compared it rather than he made a metaphor, because it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter what it's called. What matters is what's being done. And that's definitely the question that we're always going to be asking. I'm going to ask you, you and I'm going to ask it of myself and you all night tonight. So allusions, euphemisms, those are both references. They're both some level of insider. So I use a lot of allusions and euphemisms in the everyday speech. The closer I am to a person, the more allusions and euphemisms we have in common. Euphemisms, obviously, there are some that are common, like it's like a symbol, right? There are some things that everybody understands, like a heart means love, but there are also some things that are specific to a text, specific to a relationship. Okay, so a euphemism is a way to talk about something that you probably shouldn't be talking about. So any of the things that you use to talk about inappropriate or sexual or offensive ideas, the things that you say to cover those up, like in front of your parents or in front of your teachers, or even just in front of someone who you just don't want them to know what you're talking about, and you have another way to talk about it. So there are lots of euphemisms for sexual intercourse. There are a lot of euphemisms for dying. There are euphemisms for a woman's menstrual cycle. There are euphemisms for having a baby, like all of the kinds of things that people, especially long ago, didn't think were appropriate to talk about in public. So the euphemism I have here, he went to the dog park in the sky, like you might say that to a small child to kind of ease the pain of losing a dog, right? Like, you know, Choo-Choo's not coming back. He's playing with other dogs in the dog park in the sky. That's what a euphemism is. Most of the examples when I always think of euphemisms are either so inside that I need a backstory, or they're really just inappropriate. But just think about the way that you talk about things in front of adults or in front of people that you don't want to know what you're talking about. And also euphemisms often enter slang. So yes, so Sandra passed away instead of dead, that counts, right? So we, you know, a lot of times people don't want to say dead, or there are cultural reasons why they don't say that's what happened, and so they have other ways of saying it. So passed away would be a very good example. Also, you know, things that are less kind, like kick the bucket, or, you know, that kind of thing. All of those are euphemisms. So there was a question, can I post the slides that I'm using? Absolutely. So the slides get posted with the replay. So anytime you are accessing the replay, then you should be able to see the slides. And if that is not true, I will also send the slides with my kind of weekly update. I'm going to probably send those Fridays. So once we get to twice a week, it might be Monday and Thursday on Friday, but definitely Friday. And so I will also, I'm going to start giving you some homework. So I'll send that on Friday also, but it would be Friday for Thursday, not Friday for Monday, if that makes sense. So yeah, so euphemisms and allusions, and I like to think of those in kind of in tandem, because they don't do the same thing, right? An allusion talks about something directly, but doesn't give the explanation. And so a lot of times allusions are used in AP language, but even older novels are likely to use allusions, because novels were read by a certain class of people who were expected to have a certain education, right? So you could say these things and you would be expected to get that reference. So that's something that can make you feel a little bit of an outsider when you're reading from a modern perspective, but also now there's a whole new set of references that authors can make that you do understand. If anybody has read The Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde, which is a very intense novel, I recommend it. If you start it and you like it, then you'll continue to like it. I'll just say that. I can't even say if you like such and such, then you'll like this, because it's just its own, it's almost a whole genre. But there are many, many allusions in there to things, and I didn't even get them all. I didn't understand them all, and I had to look them up. But the protagonist, Oscar Wilde, he's really into comics, and he's really into sci-fi, and so all these things that I'm not particularly into, and so there were all sorts of allusions. Okay, so that's allusions and euphemisms. Litotes is something that we use often, but we don't really talk about it. It's not necessarily the opposite of hyperbole. It's a specific kind of understatement. And the whole definition is understatement in which an affirmative is expressed by the negative of the contrary, which is a lot of words to say that you are talking about how good something is by talking about how not bad it is. And why do we want to do that? We don't really. Like we just, it's so many layers. But like if he's a good chef, and I'm like, well, he's not a horrible chef. It's just a thing. It's a word that you might see, and that's the definition. Don't ever worry about memorizing it. Don't worry about knowing what it is. If you're a particularly sarcastic person, you probably use it all the time, and you just didn't have a name for it. Okay, so here's the second half of the alphabet in well-used figurative language. Again, repetitions, references, and comparisons, right? Repetitions are more likely to be found in poetry. They're the kinds of things that are like anaphora or repetition, just simple repetition, anaphora, epistrophe, that kind of thing, where something happens over and over in a particular place or time. And that is less likely to happen in a prose passage. And again, it doesn't matter if you don't know. You definitely know the word repeat, right? You know what that means. You know that if you see something over and over again, it's a repetition, and it's enough to say repetition. So again, I don't want you to worry about memorizing terms. I just really can't say that enough. Metonymy and Synecdoche I put on here because you see them often in lists of terms. I have to look them up almost every time. So again, it's not that serious to memorize the terms, but if you want to just have some examples of terms in your head, metonymy is the one where an attribute of something or something that's associated with it is used to represent it itself. So for example, if I work in a corporate office and, the people like, I used to know someone who worked in a building where all the executives worked on the top floor. And so they would say, the top floor came down and had meetings with us, right? That would be metonymy. The suits were coming to make a presentation. The White House had a press conference. That is metonymy. When it's something that's symbolizes an idea. And then synecdoche is the one where you use a part to talk about the whole. And so the classic literature example is Lend Me Your Ears from Julius Caesar. Obviously, he wants them to listen, right? But not just the ears are coming to listen. I got new wheels for my birthday. You didn't get wheels, you got a whole car. I've never gotten a car for my birthday, but somebody does somewhere. So when you talk about a part of it. So metonymy is the word associated with the idea, the concept associated. It's more like symbolism. And then synecdoche is more like a piece of the whole to represent the whole. Understatement, I think we know. Motif, I talk about a little bit. It might happen on the exam. You might have enough of a repetition of an idea to get a motif. Somebody responded to the Google form, said that they were reading 1984. 1984 has a motif of like a grayness. So that happens all the time. Obviously, eyes are a motif in 1984. Big Brother is watching. The pear tree in The Rise We're Watching God is a motif. It's something that keeps coming up. If you play an instrument, you know that like the motif is usually the melody that keeps returning. In a symphony, one instrument plays the motif, another instrument plays the motif. It keeps returning, and sometimes it looks a little bit different or sounds a little bit different, but it's creating some symbolism. And so motif isn't words, it's symbols. That's the question. Yes. So it's either one. It could be a pattern of words. It could be words that you see repeatedly that different people say them, or the narrator says it all the time. It could be words. And so basically what happens is the word or image that you see repeatedly becomes a symbol, if that makes sense. And so often it's defeat would be a motif. I think the only reason why it would be straight repetition and not symbolism is because defeat in that situation is defeat, if that makes sense. So the repetition of the word creates a motif, yes, but it was less symbolic than a lot of times motifs are. Another example. We're going to see one today. So Sandra, if you could keep that question until we read the passage for today. Then I think it'll make sense maybe. Okay. Anything on here that anybody needs clarification of? Paradox. So, okay. So if you know what an oxymoron is, an oxymoron is taking two words and making a phrase that means a new thing, right? So they're always opposite. They're always contradictory. So jumbo shrimp is an oxymoron because shrimp means little, jumbo means big. And so it's a big little thing, which makes it, I don't know, like a medium-sized thing. Another oxymoron is old news, right? How can something be old if it's news? How can it be news if it's old? And so that's an oxymoron. So a paradox, what a paradox does is take that idea and kind of stretches it out to be a whole thought. My go-to paradox is in The Fire Next Time, James Baldwin says, it is the innocence which constitutes the crime. And so that doesn't make sense, because how can innocence be a crime, right? Because the whole point of innocent is that you did not commit a crime. And so really he's kind of saying that their innocence is ignorance, and that's criminal. But the words alone mean it is the innocence that constitute, they have a crime of innocence. Another paradox is Thoreau. If anybody's read Walden, he says he did not want to come to die and discover he had not lived, which literally doesn't make any sense, because you can't die if you haven't lived. Yes. So the comment is that oxymoron and paradox seem very similar, and they are very similar. The real difference between oxymoron and paradox is that oxymoron is a phrase and paradox is a whole sentence or thought, really. So if you just took old news and said that, you know, the news hadn't reached me yet, by the time it got to me, it was old, that would be a paradox. You just took an oxymoron and stretched that out into a whole idea. Okay, let's read some. So here's an example from The Great Gatsby. And again, the questions that we're always asking when we're reading prose, especially if we're looking for figurative language, is that these questions at the top: what does the language do? What are the choices, and why would he make them? And so the choices meaning, what are the choices that the author makes in his language? And then why would he make them? So this is 2 paragraphs describing Daisy and Tom Buchanan's house. If you haven't read The Great Gatsby, I think you should do it. I feel like pretty much in life, people either love or hate The Great Gatsby. I'm one of the ones who loves it. So don't say anything against The Great Gatsby. If you're reading it right now and you don't like it, say why. I'd love to know why you don't like it, so that I can convince you that you should. Okay, so I'm going to read this, but I'm going to read it, kind of do a little bit of a read aloud. Okay. So you never understood it. And I think that The Great Gatsby is almost strictly an allegory. I also think, which is like, a story with a very strict meaning. Like, there aren't a lot of ways to interpret The Great Gatsby. People say that there are, but I don't think that there really are. It's really just a fable almost about money and greed and the consequences of the American dream, which I think it's just an interesting exploration of that. And I like Gatsby. And then I think the language is really beautiful. That helps. That I think the language is really beautiful. So Anushka says, there was a lot that I didn't think was important to the story. I think that's true. I don't blame you for that. I can't even really argue that. I think that there is a lot that is not necessarily important to the story, except it's another piece of the greed puzzle, the money puzzle. And if you read about F. Scott Fitzgerald, you'll see that he was pretty Gatsby-ish, and that he had real points in his life where he was trying really hard to kind of pull himself up by the bootstraps and climb the ladder, and it just wasn't very successful. And so there's some bitterness there. But I think there are so many people who have the dream and are just kind of getting disillusioned by the dream, that sometimes it's kind of nice to see this romantic like Gatsby who thinks that he can actually make a change, thinks that he can actually enter this society that is built to keep him out. And so it looks like he has, it looks like he will. And then the kind of moral of the allegory is that no, you can't, which is kind of depressing, but really beautiful in the moments. So that's why I like it. I think both of your objections are valid. But I also think that it's one of those things where what you hate is what I love, I think. Okay. So anyway, so the Buchanan, if you haven't read the story, the Buchanans are super rich. And Nick is coming in. Nick is the narrator. Nick is not a particularly reliable narrator, which we find out because he says in the beginning that he doesn't judge people and then proceeds to judge pretty much everyone that he comes in contact with. So we don't really trust him. We can't really trust him. And so he is a symbol of random American middle-class person who doesn't fit. Okay, so we walk through a high hallway into a bright rosy colored space, fragilely bound into the house by French windows at either end. And so already we have this like bright rose colored space. We know that roses have a symbolism. We know that red has a symbolism, but also that a rosy colored space is going to be very luxe. It's going to be very kind of intense, right? He calls it bright, but there's no way that you can have like a pinky, rosy, reddish, no matter what kind of rosy it is, right? But also this idea that it's rosy colored. He's looking at it and seeing rosy colored, and that he also looks at the Buchanans through rose colored glasses. So there's a little symbolism there. But everything already in this first sentence, everything is very open. So the choices that are being made is that there are French windows on either end. And so these are big windows. And so that the air goes all the way through. And then this is very like open and airy, right? Which gives the idea of space, gives the idea of unlimited whatever, right? Which relates to their wealth and such. The windows were ajar and gleaming white against the fresh grass outside that seemed to grow a little way into the house. A breeze blew through the room, blew curtains in at one end and out the other like pale flags, twisting them up toward the frosted wedding cake of the ceiling, and then rippled over the wine-colored rug, making a shadow on it as wind does on the sea. So again, it's very like there's a lot of movement here. There's not a lot of constriction. He feels as though this house is just kind of open and gives him very breezy, exactly, right? So he's got space to think, he's got space to be, it's free, right? So there's a freedom in their money, in their luxury that he is appreciating, and everything is white and it's pure, right? So this is some of that symbolism. We know that white is going to mean pure or surrender, either way. So we can look at it either of those ways. We've got rosy walls and we've got a wine-colored rug. And so at the end of this paragraph, the choices that he makes are comparing the room to food items, but not just any food items. And so then we start to think about what's the choice he made. And so if you think about a wedding cake, think about a traditional wedding cake, it's going to be very delicate. It's probably white as well. It's very ornate. It's fragile, but also the work of it's the work of an artist, right? And so this cake of a ceiling is very frothy and light. It goes in with this white and this breeziness, right? So everything that is being, it's white and red. And so again, we have roses. Again, we have luxury. We have kind of soul, right? Like the intensity of like love sort of thing. They have a wine-colored rug. And so there's a simile there, making a shadow on it as wind does on the sea, because you can see the wind. You can see the wind on the sea, right? You can see can't see wind. You can see what the wind does to the ocean in the same way that you can see what the curtains are doing to the rug. But it's more of the impact than the actual action. And so if we're thinking, what does the language do? It compares the room to common color symbolism that we know about. It's got white, it's got red. We know these things. This is blood. Blood as in relationship, blood as in love, blood as in connection, and it's white. White as in purity, right? He's going to go in later into these women who he sees from, at this point, he sees as very Madonna, right? They're very on a pedestal. They're on a pedestal. He's very admirable of them, respectful of them at this point. So when we're looking at figurative language, we need to be able to identify all this imagery. What's it for? And again, if it's not for anything, then it's not worth mentioning, right? But what I'm seeing is this connection to luxurious food and luxurious ideas and the freedom of open space. And again, also thinking that this is the 20s. And so if you have, US history in your head, thinking about the expansion that's happening at this point, going into the 30s. So all of that, that's what I would do with any of that. Again, there's no prompt here. So it's not necessarily about trying to fit it into any particular response. It is. So Sandra says, I wish it were that easy for me, but I think it's just identifying. So again, looking for, trying to see what the language is doing. What are the comparisons being made? What are the images being presented? And so the images being, even if you don't have all of that in the back of your head because you're not, thinking like an English teacher does, but if you think about the fact that these are all choices, why would the curtains be white? Because white is as airy as it gets, right? Why would the windows be open? Because they want the space of freedom, of wealth. The author wants it to feel as though there are limitations on what they can do or be, and they're going with the flow of the wind. The only completely stationary object in the room was an enormous couch on which two young women were buoyed up as though upon an anchored balloon. Another simile there. They are like floating, right? He's really kind of infatuated, fascinated, intrigued by these women, but he has them above him, right? So they're also airy. They're also full of like light and life, like everything else in the room. But he sees them as though they are like floating through like life. They're carefree. They're rich, They were both in white. They also are in white, again, reflecting how he feels about them, how he sees them. And their dresses were rippling and fluttering as if they had just been blown back in after a short flight around the house. So they're like the curtains, right? They're in, they're out, they're floating, they're on the flow. They're like the ocean itself, right? Just limitless and free and open and rippling and fluttering, and everything feels like this, right? And yes, okay. So Tigga says, I think knowing they're rich is the key to understand it. Absolutely. And if you were reading this, you would have known that already. But I think even if you didn't know, you would be able to conclude that yourself, right? Because everything feels like luxury. Yes, everything feels like luxury. It feels like the freedom of wealth. And I think that if he wanted them to feel less rich, things would be less white. They would be less open. They would not be rippling and fluttering. They would be more stable, right? So I must have stood for a few moments listening to the whip and snap of the curtains and the groan of a picture on the wall. Then there was a boom as Tom Buchanan shut the rear window, and the caught wind died out about the room, and the curtains and the rugs and the two young women ballooned slowly to the floor. So I'm going to leave that for you. What is the effect, even with so little description of him, Tom Buchanan? What is the effect that he has on the room and the people? Okay, so he owns it. It's negative, yes. takes away the freedom. Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. So they've been rippling and fluttering. And so if you look at the verbs, right, the breeze blew, the curtains blew, the curtains twisted and rippled, the women were buoyed, their dresses were rippling and fluttering, they were blown back, and everything is just up. Everything's up in the air, and just, you know, for an English teacher, sometimes I really don't have words. So everything's up in the air, it's floating, it's light, and he comes in and shuts the window and brings everything down to the ground. And so the difference in implication between them being light and airy and being stable and grounded, right, is that same idea earlier about them being rich and free. Yeah, absolutely, right? So Anushka says he kills the vibe. Absolutely. He brings he totally harshes the mellow, right? If that's, a term that anybody uses. But like he brings everybody down, like literally down, figuratively down. He's beyond grounded. It's not even just that they're in their imagination and he brings them kind of to the literal. Like he takes things from abstract to concrete. He takes them from figurative to literal, and he takes them from happy and light to heavy and dark. Yeah. So if we were going to write about it, right. So, and the thing is, if you read the book, like Tom Buchanan, he's not a good guy. Like he's horrible. He's horrible in every way. And so to bring him into the scene this way, it says that not only does he have that impact on Nick, the narrator, but he also has that impact on these women who out of context, you don't know, but you know that they were buoyed and they were on a balloon and now they're on the floor. Right. So the Great Gatsby is one of the only movies that I recommend in life, and definitely one of the only movies that I recommend of a book that I really love. The last movie, the Leonardo DiCaprio movie, does a really good job of making these sorts of symbolisms. I don't know if symbolisms is a plural, but this sort of symbolism, making this sort of symbolism visual. So I think that that's the thing. You got time right now. Read the book, watch the movie, or both, or and really in either order. I think that this is probably the single movie book combination where I'm like, you kind of get it especially if you're one of the people who's like, it's too many words that don't matter, then watch the movie. Okay. So that's the kind of answers we want for what are the choices, right? What choices does he make in describing the room? What choices does he make in setting up the entrance of Tom Buchanan? And then why would he make them? He makes them because he wants the room to feel airy and free. He wants the people to seem pure and delicate, like flowers, right? There are rose references, balloon references. He wants everything to feel very light and very delicate and even almost fragile. And so that we can see how far that comes down when Tom Buchanan enters. But even without Tom Buchanan, he creates, with his comparisons, he creates luxury. And that, yes. So thank you. So Tigges says he uses imagery and metaphor, and absolutely. And so we would say, like, that's how the sentence would work, that F. Scott Fitzgerald uses imagery and metaphor to create a sense of luxury and weightlessness in the room that is then ruined by Tom Buchanan's heavy entrance. And that would be a beautiful analysis, right? I mean, I know I just called my own analysis beautiful, but that would be the sentence. That would be the setup. And then you would go forward to give evidence. And so, yes, there's a little bit of a motif there with the rose. I think with the colors, I think motif. So thank you. Excellent, Tigges. So the motif, definitely the white, because we have white windows, we have white curtains. Though they're in white dresses. So we've got a repetition of white 3 times. And so that creates a pattern that ties in with the symbolism that we already know about white and about purity. With the roses, yes. Also, you could use the color itself, just the rosy color that goes with the wine-colored rug. And so those together would be kind of the balance of the white. And then also a motif of wind. So the dresses are rippling and fluttering like they're in the wind. The women are buoyed like on a balloon, which would be on the wind. The wind is blowing in and out through the room. And so that is exactly how motif works. Good job, right? That's exactly how motif works. So when you see the repetition of something over and over and over again. Okay, so because it's 8:40, I'm going to skip this example from Their Eyes Were Watching God because I got all excited about The Great Gatsby and took up too much time. But this also has a lot of, so I feel like the Great Gatsby example, oh good. So we'll come back to Their Eyes Were Watching God. The example from The Great Gatsby was a lot of imagery and really not as much metaphor. There were a couple of similes, but Their Eyes Were Watching God. This has some metaphors that don't really necessarily feel like metaphors. But the question would be like, why these things? So I will save that for another day. Go, Samantha hated Their Eyes Are Watching God. Oh my gosh. So real quick, as we move forward, why did you hate Their Eyes Are Watching God, Samantha? I'm going to say really quickly while you're getting it down. Okay, so again, I actually think that if you like one of these books, you'll like the other, and same for if you hated it. I think that Zora Neale Hurston and F. Scott Fitzgerald are both very much about describing things, and I get into that. I get into the language of it. I think, this kind of discussion of it and analysis of it is just what I love. So I definitely can see, I think that the very beginning and the very end of Their Eyes Were Watching God have some of the most beautiful language that I've ever seen, including these 2 paragraphs. So I definitely feel like Samantha, but I also think that Their Eyes Are Watching God is one of those things that if you start it, like The Great Gatsby, if you start it, it'll keep going that way. But I think Their Eyes Are Watching God doesn't really start as it continues. So the middle of the book is very like story. And also I used to love romance novels when I was little. So if anybody's falling in love, I'm all about it. And Janie falls in love and falls out of love and has horrible relationships and good relationship. And it's kind of salacious. It's a little bit like a movie. So yeah, okay. Yeah, so yeah, and the dialect. Their Eyes Watching God with dialect. Okay. I will say about Their Eyes Watching God, that is not a movie that I recommend. I love Halle Berry, but that's a horrible movie. But also, if you can get past the dialect, then you can really get into it. And there's a really good recording. There is a movie. Yes. Yeah. The answer to that is yes. There is a movie. The movie is absolutely horrible. It's horrible. Sorry, wasting time. Okay, so this is what we're going to look at for the rest of our time. The following selection is the opening of Anne Petry's 1946 novel, The Street. Read the selection carefully and then write an essay analyzing how Petry established Ludi Johnson's relationship to the urban setting through the use of literary devices. So, 2 things. One, under the... I hate it when people do that, but I've never been able to do it. So, under the main screen with me in the corner and the slides in the forefront, there is a link to this passage and prompt. You should be able to click on that and get to the Google Doc with the passage and the prompt on it. If you want to annotate it, you're going to need to make a copy, just so everybody wouldn't be on annotating together. But you can have that, and we can do that together. So Sumi had a question earlier. Could it be almost romantic? That was about the Great Gatsby room. Is that, sorry. I saw it come up, but now I can't remember when you asked. Yeah, so definitely the room is romantic. Romantic in terms of like every way that you talk about romance. If you're talking about like the romantic period, that was very about nature and emotions, it's romantic that way. It's romantic with a capital R. It's romantic as in like he's kind of in love with these women in that way, but also just that idea of air and water and nature and white. Yes, very romantic. So really any way that you think about romance, it is. Yeah, that's a great analysis. So, okay. So while you're finding that and opening it, I also do have the first couple paragraphs here, but the first question, and I'm actually going to switch to the document in a minute. But the first question is, when we're looking at the prompt, because we're always trying to figure out what it is that we're trying to answer and analyze, what is it that you're being asked to analyze? Yes. How Petrie establishes Ludi Johnson's relationship to the urban setting. Yes, the relationship. And actually, so those the three comments kind of go almost in order, but yeah, so this big idea, Anushka, is how Petrie establishes the relationship, and then the kind of take that down one more level, the Johnson's relationship to the setting, and then Benta, yes, the relationship. So if I wanted to say what's the one word, right, it would be relationship. And so we're looking for her relationship to the setting, which is an odd kind of relationship, which is why I wanted to choose this one. Because how often do we have a relationship with our setting, right? But you will see there was a relationship here. Okay, so we're looking for how she establishes the relationship to the urban setting. And again, we're looking for what language does she use? What are the choices that she makes in that language? And then why does she make those choices? And so we have 3 steps. The first one is just to notice the language. And then the second is to be able to explain what the language is doing, which is what I did with Gatsby, like kind of saying, what are the pictures that are being created here? What are the implications that are happening? But then now we have a box, right? We have a bucket. People like to use bucket. We have a bucket in which these things need to fall. And so if they don't fall into the relationship with the setting bucket, then we don't care about it. We don't care. It could be a beautiful description of her best friend. But if her best friend is not the urban setting, we don't care about the best friend. So the best friend could be a model, could be a beautiful person in a fur coat only, I don't know, painted purple. Great, but we don't care because we only care about relationship to the setting. And that's going to help in your reading of the passage in the first place, because yes, you only have time to skim, right? You want to be able to read the prompt, figure out what you're being asked, and read the passage and have collected evidence. You want to be able to do all of that in probably 15 minutes. So you want to be very purposeful in your reading, because you want to be able to have time to put it together. Oops. You want to have time to put it together and organize it, right? So relationship to the urban setting. And again, what have we been told? Like, what do we know about the setting? It's urban, right? Right? Yeah, like that was, softball. Yeah, we know it's urban. And so we expect it to be in a city. We know that it's not going to be about horses running free. We know that it probably also is not going to have white curtains rippling like the wind does to the sea, right? Because that's not very urban. So we know that it's probably going to be tight, probably. It's going to be citified. And if you live in a city, you know exactly what that means. And if you don't, it's the opposite of what you got, right? So we have some predictions that we can make. And these questions were at the bottom. I'm sorry, they're at the top. They're underneath the prompt. What do we know about the setting? What can we predict about it? What's been given to us? So we want to make sure that we have those in the back of our heads as we're going into the passage itself. So there was a cold November wind blowing through 116th Street. Already, you've been given so much. It doesn't seem like a whole lot, but it's a whole lot because we know when in the year it is. And if we think about this is a whole other stream. But if we think about when in the year November is, we know that it's getting cold, but also November is the end of fall, which means that like death is on approach. It's a whole thing. It's a real thing, I promise. But like when we think about November, it's probably after leaves have turned, right? Things are brown and cold and bare in November, or we're getting there. And so there's a cold November wind. It's not a, mild fall day blowing through 116th Street. It rattled the tops of garbage cans, sucked window shades out through the top of opened windows and set them flapping back against the windows. And it drove most of the people off the street in the block between 7th and 8th Avenues, except for a few hurried pedestrians who bent double in an effort to offer the least possible exposed surface to its violent assault. Whoa. How many sentences in that paragraph? 2. And the first one is over before the first line. So that is a very long sentence, which is something we'll talk about in the diction and syntax session. But it's a very long sentence. And you see, even I've read this sentence before, obviously, and prepared to read it tonight, but I got caught up, right? I started stumbling over things. Literally in my reading, I started stumbling over words in the same way that people are stumbling on 116th Street. Do you see how she did that? Like, that's amazing. So she creates this sentence that kind of builds and builds. It keeps going and talking about all of these things. What is the wind doing? Give me some verbs. Attacking the pedestrians. Yes. Assaulting the people on the street, right? Rattled. So yes. So Sumi and Anushka both have they made assertions of their own, right? And then Sandra used actual, like literal textual evidence, and both are correct. But it's rattling the tops. It's sucking the window shades. It's flapping shades back. It's driving the people off the street. And assault is a evidence word, right? So already in the first paragraph, and there will be more paragraphs, but already in the first paragraph, how can you characterize the wind? Violent, yes. Strong, yes. Brutal, yes. I want to keep going. But already we see this. And so vicious, thank you. Forcefully violent, absolutely. This is not a gentle breeze. This is not the breeze in the Buchanan's house, right? Okay, so we're looking again to analyze what? The relationship. And so what kind of relationship could one person on the street possibly have with a violent, vicious, brutal, forceful, strong wind? Yes, you would hate it, right? You would hate it. What would we call a negative relationship? But even more so. So let's keep reading. So now we're looking for a word that we can use to talk about how Ludi feels in this setting, about this setting. I found every scrap of paper along the street, theater throwaways, announcements of dances and lodge meetings, the heavy waxed paper that loaves of bread had been wrapped in, the thinner waxed paper that had enclosed sandwiches, old envelopes, newspapers. Fingering its way along the curb, the wind set the bits of paper to dancing high in the air so that a barrage of papers swirled into the faces of the people on the street. It even took time to rush into doorways and areaways and find chicken bones and pork chop bones and push them along the curb. Somebody tell me the figurative language that they see. You can either give phrases or you can give terms. Imagery, personification, absolutely. Hyperbole. So, again, if figurative language is references and comparisons, here we have comparisons. This imagery, personification, hyperbole are all comparing the wind to something, comparing it to a person, comparing it to something violent. What other kind of thing is as violent as this wind? Right? What is the implication that she's making about the wind? And if the people, including Ludi Johnson, if the people are subject to this violence, then what can we say about the people? What do we call people who are subject to violence? Right. Ticket said victim. Yes. So here we have the relationship. They're vulnerable. Absolutely. Here we have the relationship. We already know in the first two sentences what the relationship is. Yes. It's great, right? We already know in the first two paragraphs what the relationship is between the people and the setting. And we know that Ludi's one of those people. We already have a thesis. That's crazy. We already have a thesis that Ann Petrie uses personification of the wind, because again, we want to put modifiers on the terms. Personification of the wind, imagery of the street to create a victimizing relationship, violent relationship, abusive relationship between the Ludi Johnson and the urban setting. Period. Thesis. And so then all we have to do now is look for more evidence. All we need is more imagery, more personification, more metaphor, more hyperbole, so that we can have a full, robust paragraph so that we can beat this test the way the wind was beating the people. That's it. You guys did that. I just asked the questions, right? So, so I want to look at these again. We're thinking about what does the language do, and then we always want to ask ourselves, why did the author say this, right? So even if we're just looking at those two paragraphs, the second paragraph it starts to be a different kind of personification. So the first paragraph is very violent. It rattled, it sucked, it slapped, it flapped, assault. And then the second paragraph, it found the paper, it fingered its way, it set the paper to dancing, the paper swirled. It took time to rush into doorways and find chicken bones, right? So it's not gentle, but it is different. And so we want to say, what kind of now, does this shift the relationship? Does this shift the adjective that we're using to talk about the wind? Yeah. So we've gone from a big kind of stormy wind to a wind that fingers and finds. And so then it feels more annoying, good, intrusive. Yes. Yes. Right? So we still have this, I just keep thinking of the word insidious, but I also keep seeing from the Addams Family. I can't think of the, yes, creepy, Tickets, the creepy, right? So it's a little, it's more insidious, it's more intrusive, it's more purposeful because it's not as big. Now it's got fingers, right? Okay. So the last few things we want to talk, when we think about metaphors, because this is where it gets a little, you have to start to analyze. You have to be able to say, not only she used a metaphor, but she used a metaphor to compare this to that, meaning, and then no. So in line 35, it's a sign. that's been out in the elements. And it says slowly rusted, making a dark red stain like blood. Well, obviously the comparison is between the rust and the blood, but why blood? What does blood imply? Even if you just see that line out of context. Okay, so we have death, right? And again, death and violence, yes. So we already know that the wind is beating people up. A dark side, yes, danger or harm or violence. We already know that the wind is beating people up. And so the wind has been beating everybody. The wind has been swirling everything around. And the elements, we also know that it's November, which is entering into winter, which is when the things die off. And so it's all part of this motif of cold, dark, right? This violence that's very cold. It's not a passionate wind. It's cold and, sociopathic, I guess. So again, and then another line like she felt suddenly naked and bald. We could call that a metaphor. We could call it wouldn't be imagery because she's not naked and bald, but it continues in this relationship that the wind does not allow her any protection, right? That the wind takes from her the protection, whatever protection she had. There's also exposed, right? That the wind this is the relationship that she has with the wind. And then the last idea, so that's going back to fingering and finding, stuck its fingers inside their coat collars. This is it's almost personal, right? So this wind, it goes from a great big idea that's attacking everybody, but then it's getting very close. I can't stop saying insidious, but it is pervasive, right? It's actually finding them and treating them very poorly. And so if you think about an urban setting, right, the people are probably not rich because it's not that kind of urban. And also just from the trash that you see, the trash that's used, you can see what kind of environment this is. And so we're talking about the urban setting and the people on the street, but we're also, again, talking about this wind. And again, we're constantly looking for support now because, again, I keep saying again, I'm going to say again. When you read those first two paragraphs, you already knew what kind of wind it was. You already knew what kind of relationship it was. And you were ready to be able to look only for further proof. Does the wind count as the setting? Yes. Yes, it does. Right. Absolutely. So she's a victim of the setting. She's, I think that's, the wind is, the setting is the antagonist. Right. And she's going to try to keep going forward because that's what protagonists do. Okay. I'm so excited. That was so great. I just want to say that I came on and I wasn't really feeling that great. And I had a tickle in the back of my throat. But you guys have been really awesome tonight. Please do. Please check your emails. Friday over the weekend. If you don't want to do schoolwork or even Fiveable work, then don't. But just read this. Read the rest of this. Read the rest of this passage, and I think we'll come back to this next week. Again, next week we'll shift to 6 o'clock Eastern, and then the week after that we'll go to twice a week, Monday and Thursday. So have that. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you everybody for your contributions. So this Monday the 13th we won't meet yet. We'll meet Thursday the 16th at 6 p.m. and then Monday the 20th and 23rd, both at 6. So the week of the 20th we'll go into twice a week, 6 p.m. Eastern, whatever time that is where you are. And again, if definitely watch the replays. Next Thursday at 6 p.m. Yes. Okay. So it's 9:03. Thank you so much for coming. Have a great night, however much of your night is left. Thank you again. Please come back because these are really great conversations and they really, you guys are the ones that I'm talking to lately. So I really appreciate you being here and coming through and bringing your analysis skills. Have a great night. Oh, sorry, there are questions before you go. This situation, since you were talking about syntax, where the question is asking for figurative language, would it be okay to talk about syntax in our essay? Yes. So, sorry, before everybody goes, yes, absolutely. Syntax is not figurative language necessarily, but anytime you're talking about literary devices, syntax matters. Again, there'll be a whole stream on syntax, but yes, the syntax counts as a device that you would use in analysis of prose. Yes. Okay, now you can go. Have a good night.